Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1. Alice's phone vibrated at the exact moment she tilted the bottle toward her lips, freezing her smile mid-performance. The camera caught everything: the careful angle, the practiced swallow, the illusion of nourishment. What it didn't capture was the sink below the frame, already stained with the thick beige sludge she poured out seconds earlier. The taste lingered anyway, imaginary but familiar, like guilt you learn to ignore once it starts paying your bills. She stopped recording and glanced at the screen. A delivery alert. Her pulse jumped before she even read the sender's name. She had been tagging that vintage shop relentlessly. Weeks of strategic mentions, curated nostalgia, subtle desperation wrapped in aesthetics. And now, finally, recognition. Not from people, but from the system behind them. That invisible force that decided who mattered today. The package waited on her front step, soaking up the desert heat. November in Scottsdale still burned like summer refusing to admit it was over. She wrapped a dish towel around her hand before lifting the box. The cardboard seared her palm through the fabric, as if it didn't want to be touched. Inside, she placed it carefully on the table, already imagining the clip. Her audience, nearly 500,000 faces blurred into a single number, lived for this moment. The reveal, the wanting. She had taught them how to want by wanting beautifully herself. Desire, framed just right, passed for identity online. She hit record. Paper whispered as she peeled it back. The coat surfaced slowly, heavy and deliberate, as though it had been waiting. Velvet, the deep, dark red of something vital. Tiny black beads stitched along the seams caught the light and bent it strangely, never quite reflecting it back the same way twice. She paused, just long enough to build suspense. The cut felt old, not retro, not inspired. Old in the way buildings feel old when you sense history trapped in the walls. Inside the collar, a label stared back at her, faded cursive, uneven, intimate. A Paris address. A name that looked handwritten, the ink browned with age. She smiled at the camera and spoke with effortless fluency, praising craftsmanship, rarity, obsession. The words flowed without thought. They always did. But something was wrong. The coat carried a scent that didn't belong in her spotless home. Sweet at first, flowers maybe, then sour beneath it. Like petals rotting in stagnant water. Like perfume sprayed too generously over something meant to be hidden. A memory surfaced uninvited. A bird she'd found once, dried and weightless, its body hollowed by time. Her smile tightened. She slipped the coat on. It settled over her shoulders with a quiet finality. The fabric cooled despite the heat outside. It fit perfectly, not close enough to be flattering, exact, as if it had been waiting for her shape. She turned toward the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look styled. She looked anchored, heavier somehow, not in body but in presence. The coat stripped away the soft glow she usually relied on, replacing it with something dense and undeniable. This version of her didn't invite approval. She didn't perform. She existed. The realization sent a thin ripple of unease through her chest. Her entire life was built on balance, accessible but distant, genuine but edited. The figure in the glass violated all of that. She wasn't aspirational. She wasn't relatable. She was real. Alice looked away quickly and reached for her phone instead. The comments were already pouring in, stacking faster than she could read. Where did you get it? Link. I need this. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Behind her, the mirror held its silence. Link, please. She smiled for the camera, slow and knowing. Let them ache for it. She had learned early that immediacy killed longing. If you wanted people invested, you withheld. You delayed. You taught them to feel the absence. Want sharpened when denied. Her hand slid into the coat's pocket, expecting nothing. Her fingers closed around something solid. She stilled. Then carefully she drew it out. A square of paper folded over itself so many times it had become dense, compact, deliberate. She was still recording, though instinct told her this footage would never survive the edit. The paper was old in a way that couldn't be faked. Thick, fibrous. It resisted unfolding as though it preferred to remain secret. Ink scratched across it in narrow, elegant lines, a language she almost recognized. French or close enough. Fragments surfaced from forgotten classrooms. A word for time, a reference to midnight. Another word stopped her breath entirely, one that didn't need translation. Demon. A name followed, something ancient sounding, something heavy, and then a word she knew meant the desperate, the unseen, the forgotten. She laughed too loudly for the camera, her voice bright and empty, tossing off a remark about vintage notes and aesthetic storytelling. She folded the paper again, slid it back into the pocket, and ended the recording. Only then did she notice her hand was trembling. She stood alone in her living room, surrounded by white walls, pale wood, carefully arranged plants chosen for how they photographed. Everything was controlled, balanced, beautiful, and yet the small square of paper in her pocket felt impossibly present. It was nothing, she told herself. A flourish. People loved artifacts, letters tucked into seams, old clippings sewn into linings, history manufactured for charm. That was the point of vintage, the illusion of story. Still, her fingers kept returning to the pocket. The paper was warm. That night the coat hung in her closet between garments that had never known hands before hers. Luxury without memory. Alice lay awake, staring into the dark. Sleeplessness was familiar. Numbers, metrics, strategy looping endlessly. But this was different. The dark felt crowded, as if something else had settled into it. At 3:47 a.m., a sound pulled her fully awake. Soft, subtle. Fabric brushing fabric. She held her breath, listening. The sound came again, too intentional to be air, too slow to be chance. Like something shifting its weight, like breathing. She wrapped herself in her robe and crossed the apartment. The closet lights flickered on, bright and unforgiving. Everything was still. The coat hung exactly where she'd left it. She reached for it, then stopped. The velvet radiated warmth. She shut the door without touching it. Sleep, when it finally came, dragged her under into something deeper than rest. She dreamed of women dressed in old silhouettes, standing shoulder to shoulder in a wide, empty room. Their clothes were different. Their faces were not. They turned toward her in unison, not threatening, not kind, simply waiting. In the dream, she knew they had all worn the coat. In the dream, she knew why they were gone. She woke with the taste of flowers and metal in her mouth. Friday arrived like it always did. Indifferent and on time. Friday showed no concern for what the night had taken from her. At 10 sharp, Alice was expected to smile through a brand call, a new collagen miracle, engineered to turn back time one cell at a time. She dressed with care, choosing clean lines, neutral tones, credibility stitched into every scene. And yet her hand drifted past the familiar options. She reached for the velvet coat. The decision felt less like a choice and more like etiquette, as if ignoring it would be impolite, wasteful. She had paid a small fortune after all, and appearances were investments. Content was content. The meeting unraveled quickly. Her focus slipped, drawn again and again to the back of her chair where the coat hung, heavy and watchful. The marketing director repeated a question, then repeated it again. Alice blinked, startled, words lagging behind comprehension. She glanced down at her notebook. Her handwriting had changed. The letters bent sharply, narrow and slanted, crowding each other with unsettling precision. It looked disturbingly close to the script on the folded note. Her fingers ached. When she tried to move them, the joints resisted, stiff and tense, as though something inflexible had replaced muscle and tendon. She flexed under the table and felt a faint vibration, tight and metallic like drawn wire. She excused herself early, blaming a headache that didn't exist. At home, she laid the paper flat on her marble counter. The kitchen felt too large, too quiet. She hovered her phone over the cramped lines and waited as the translation struggled to assemble meaning from fragments. The message came together slowly, reluctantly. The garment is not empty. It carries a passenger. At the seventh midnight, the balance is collected. The soul of the wearer is taken. There was a condition, a single exception. The coat must be given, not sold, not abandoned, given freely without performance or expectation to someone who has nothing at all. Alice laughed. The sound rang through the house and came back to her hum. Absurd. This was the kind of theatrical nonsense sellers adored. A manufactured myth to inflate value, to justify price tags and exclusivity. She had seen it before. Everyone loved a story, especially one that made them feel chosen. Her laughter faded. Her fingers were cold. She pulled up the delivery confirmation. Thursday, November 16th. 7 days later, landed on Thanksgiving. She snorted softly at the coincidence. If she believed in curses, which she didn't, except the coat retained heat in chilled rooms, except sleep now brought visions of women who never spoke, except her reflection when she wore it looked older than her years, eyes carrying the memory of something enclosed and lightless. She opened her laptop and searched for the boutique. Gone. The listing had vanished. The confirmation email bounced back, the address no longer existing. The website returned nothing but an error page, blank and indifferent. Her pulse quickened. She searched the designer's name, fashion archives, city records, anything. Nothing. No references, no history, no trace, as if the name had been scraped clean from time itself. Alice leaned back in her chair and forced her breathing to slow. There were explanations. There always were. Small operations closed overnight. Domains expired. Records vanished all the time. She told herself this until the words felt thin. And somewhere behind the closed closet door, Velvet waited. Of course there were explanations. Businesses disappeared every day. Websites expired. Email servers failed. The timing meant nothing. The world was stitched together with coincidences, and humans loved assigning meaning where there was none. Still, she opened a private browser window. The search felt embarrassing, like admitting fear out loud. She typed anyway. The results were predictable: folklore blogs, creepypasta archives, half-serious threads written for entertainment. Nothing grounded, nothing that asked to be believed. She narrowed it. Vintage coat curse. Demon garment. Mason Ashambo. One result surfaced. An old forum thread, nearly a decade old, archived. The account that posted it erased. The title made her stomach tighten. Has anyone heard of coats from Mason Ashambo? Please help. The post was short. A woman in Montreal, an estate sale, a red velvet coat, a folded note in the pocket written in French. She translated it midnight, a demon, a demand to give the coat away to someone in need. She asked if it was a known legend, if anyone recognized the name. 3 replies. 2 brushed it off. Great find, great story. Vintage sellers love theatrics. The 3rd response was different. If you have that coat, get rid of it. Don't sell it. Give it away. I'm serious. That account was gone too. The original poster never replied again. Alice closed the laptop. Her hands were numb. She turned toward the bedroom door where the coat hung. Afternoon light poured through the windows, catching the velvet and deepening its color. It no longer looked like clothing. It looked organic, as though it had once pulsed, once carried heat of its own. She considered destroying it, driving it far from the city, fire, sand, distance. But the note had been exact. Not sold, not discarded, given. And the part of her that had survived this long, the part that understood systems, rules, loopholes, knew that precision mattered, if any of this were real, which it was. Saturday dissolved into research. Alice had always been good at that. Digging, pattern finding, control through information. She read obsessively, ancient folklore, modern superstition, the strange consistency of rules attached to cursed things. The internet, it turned out, had firm opinions about demons. And nearly all of them agreed on one point. Loopholes didn't work. Intent mattered. Half measures failed. Charity performed for convenience was not charity at all. The act had to cost something. Pride, comfort, security. It had to come from seeing another person's need and placing it above your own. Alice sat back in her chair, unsettled. She had never done anything like that. Not once. By nightfall, the decision had made itself. She folded the coat carefully and placed it in a garment bag. She rehearsed explanations she would never give. On Sunday morning, she drove past familiar streets until the city thinned and faces grew harder. She parked near a shelter that didn't photograph well. No signage worth sharing. No angles worth saving. Inside, she found a woman sitting quietly near the entrance. Thin jacket, worn shoes, eyes that didn't ask for anything. Alice hesitated. Then she handed the coat over without recording, without smiling, without saying anything clever at all. The woman's fingers trembled as they touched the velvet. Alice left before gratitude could become something she owned. At midnight on Thursday, she lay awake in her bed, fully dressed, waiting. Nothing happened. No heat. No breath in the dark. No whisper of fabric. Morning came. Alice woke lighter than she had in weeks. On Friday, her followers noticed something different. Her engagement dipped. Her content felt flatter, less compelling. She couldn't explain it. The hunger that once drove her performances had dulled. Across the city, a woman walked through the cold, wrapped in red velvet that fit her like a promise. And somewhere, something countered the exchange and moved on, dissatisfied but bound. The algorithm noticed the change. It always did. She had given before, technically, the safe kind. The kind that came with receipts and thank you emails. The kind that translated neatly into captions and soft focus photos. The year she championed clean water, smiling beside reusable bottles, speaking earnestly about responsibility. The nonprofit had sent her a video, children laughing, gratitude carefully edited, and she had shared it everywhere. The response had been phenomenal. But had she ever cared about thirst, or only about appearing compassionate? She tried to picture the faces behind those campaigns and found nothing. Tried to remember the last unhoused person she'd truly seen. Not passed, not avoided. There was a man who sat outside the grocery store on Camelback. She had walked past him countless times. She couldn't recall his eyes, or his voice, or anything at all. The realization hollowed her out, left her feeling exposed, as if something vital had been removed and only presentation remained. Sunday blurred into Monday. The coat stayed in the closet. She avoided touching it. Each time she opened the door, a sour sweetness drifted out, flowers drowned in stagnant water. She stopped posting. Messages stacked up unanswered. Her manager called, then called again. Alice let the phone ring until it stopped. Tuesday night, sleep dragged her into a place without exits. She stood in a room with no doors, no windows. Women encircled her, dressed in silhouettes that marched backward through time. Sharp shoulders, cinched waists, long skirts, darker fabrics. Each wore the coat or something unmistakably descended from it. Their eyes were empty, not dead, but waiting. One of them spoke. Her voice moved like air through a ruined building. She spoke of giving. Alice tried to respond, tried to explain that she planned to, that she meant it. Another voice interrupted, colder, sharper. It asked whether she would truly give, or whether she would bargain, reframe, escape. The question soaked into her, heavy and inescapable. Alice had always been exceptional at escape. She woke gasping. The clock glowed 3:33 a.m. From the closet came the sound of fabric shifting. By Wednesday, she had a plan, a real one. No cameras, no captions. She would find someone who needed warmth and give it to them directly. No intermediaries, no strategy. She would speak kindly. She would mean it. That would be enough. It had to be. She lifted the coat from the hanger. When she put it on, the velvet settled over her shoulders with deliberate care. She reached to remove it. Her arms didn't respond. She tugged harder. The fabric clung, heavy and intimate, as though it had learned the shape of her. Panic flared. She pulled at the lapels, muscles burning as they refused to cooperate. The beating pressed into her collarbone, dozens of sharp, cold points biting down. The coat did not let go. It held her. The beating dug into her skin, no longer ornamental. It felt functional, like rows of tiny mouths clamped shut, holding fast. The coat resisted with quiet certainty. Panic burst open in her chest. She pulled harder. White-hot pain tore through her shoulders, sharp enough to steal her breath. The velvet did not yield. In the mirror, her reflection smiled. Alice hadn't. Her hands froze. Slowly, carefully, she stopped fighting. Her voice came out thin as she spoke to the empty room, promising, no, pleading. She said she would give it away, that she understood the terms, that she would do it properly this time. She sounded unwell, she knew that. The pressure eased. When she tried again, the coat slid free, heavy and alive with warmth. She folded it with meticulous care, placed it inside a designer shopping bag, and carried it to her car as though it might object again if she moved too quickly. She didn't actually know where to find poverty. Not in any real sense. She knew the idea of it, the abstract locations, shelters, kitchens, streets she drove past without seeing. Those places felt distant, divided from her world by more than geography. She chose a shelter from a map search and drove. The building was squat and colorless, practical in a way that suggested too many needs and not enough answers. Alice parked and immediately wished she hadn't. The car announced her before she even stepped out. So did everything else about her. The shine of jewelry, the cut of her clothes, her hands. She stayed seated for 3 minutes watching. A woman juggling 2 small children, an older man dragging one leg behind him, a boy barely old enough to shave, a backpack slung tight against his spine like armor. She had never been inside a place like this, had never needed to be. Comfort had always surrounded her, and success had only thickened the barrier. She had built abundance without ever asking who was left out of it. Inside, the woman at the desk looked exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Her name tag read Gloria. Alice offered the bag, explaining she wanted to donate a coat. Gloria barely looked at it. Donations were accepted on specific days. They were overstocked on women's items. What they really needed were men's coats. There was a donation center. Alice cut her off. Her voice came out too loud, too sharp. She said she needed to give it away today, that it mattered. Gloria's expression softened into something practiced and wary. She asked gently if Alice was okay. For a moment, Alice almost told the truth. She had until tomorrow night. The sentence formed cleanly in her mind, sharp, complete, but refused to leave her mouth. She swallowed it down and said only that she needed to help someone, that it mattered. Gloria sighed, the sound of someone who had learned not to ask why anymore. She mentioned a woman named Alma, slept near the wash off 32nd Street, came by sometimes, might take it. Then a pause, a warning, not somewhere you went alone. Alice thanked her and left before fear could slow her down. The wash was a wide concrete scar cutting through the land, meant for rain that came rarely and violently. Empty now, exposed. The sky burned low and gold, November light turning everything the color of tarnished metal. A shelter of blue tarps leaned against the channel wall, its opening facing the sinking sun. Alice stopped the car and stepped out. Alma, she called, her voice sounding thin in the open air. A woman emerged slowly. Age had flattened its markers on her face. She could have been 50 or 70. Life had rubbed the numbers away. Gray hair tied back with a worn bandana. Skin toughened by sun and time. Her gaze moved first to the car, then back to Alice, cataloging the contrast without judgment. Lost, she asked. Alice shook her head and lifted the bag. She said she had a coat, said it was hers if she wanted it. Alma didn't reach for it. Why? The question landed hard. Alice searched for something that wasn't panic, wasn't fear, wasn't the truth. She spoke about cold nights, about needing warmth. Do I? Alma asked gently. The certainty drained out of Alice. She realized too late that she had decided what need looked like without asking. The bag felt suddenly intrusive, performative. I don't know, Alice admitted. I shouldn't assume, I just do you want it. Alma studied her for a long moment, then glanced at the logo on the bag. What kind of coat? Alice hesitated. Vintage, red velvet, maybe from the 40s. Something changed. Alma's eyes unfocused, drifting somewhere behind the present. She spoke of a mother who once owned a coat like that, how she'd worn it like armor, how in it she'd looked untouchable, like someone meant for a different life. Alice held the bag out again. You can try it. Alma's hand hovered uncertain. What's wrong with it? Alice frowned. What do you mean? People don't give away expensive things. Alma said simply. Unless there's a reason. The logic was clean, unarguable. Alice should have lied. She had lied for a living, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said the closest thing to truth she could manage. It doesn't belong to me. Alma considered that. Then she reached out and took the coat. When she slipped it on, it settled differently, lighter, as if it had been waiting for her shape instead. The velvet darkened in the dying light, rich and alive. Alma closed her eyes. It's warm, she said. Alice felt something loosen in her chest. She waited. She didn't rush. She didn't explain. She stood there, empty-handed with nothing to gain. Finally, Alma nodded. I'll keep it. The words landed like a release. Alice walked back to her car without looking behind her. The engine started. The clock on the dashboard ticked forward. Midnight passed unnoticed. Nothing followed her home. No breath in the dark. No whisper of fabric. No heat where it didn't belong. The next morning, her phone felt strangely quiet. The numbers dipped. Engagement softened. The hunger that once drove her had thinned to a dull echo. She stood in front of her mirror, unadorned, and saw herself clearly for the first time in a long while. Not aspirational, not curated, just present. Somewhere near the wash, a woman stood wrapped in red velvet, watching the sun rise. And somewhere else, something ancient took note. Unsatisfied but bound by the rules it had written itself. She had built her entire career on soft lies shaped like truth. But standing there in the wash, dusk collapsing around them, facing a woman who had nothing left to lose and no patience for illusion, the real words escaped. It's cursed. Alma laughed. The sound was harsh and unmusical, like stones shaken in a jar. Then keep it. Please. The word tore out of Alice, stripped of polish. She stumbled over explanations about needing Alma to take it, about rules and gifts and fixing what she had broken, about how maybe, if it was given freely, with something close enough to a clean heart, it might spare them both. Or maybe, she added weakly, it only takes me. Alma's smile vanished. She stepped backward toward the shelter of blue tarp. Find someone else to save yourself with. Then she was gone. Alice stood alone in the wash, the shopping bag dangling from her fingers. The bag went cold. Not the absence of warmth, true cold, the kind that burns. The shock tore through the paper into her palms, up her arms. She nearly dropped it. Inside, the coat radiated fury. She felt it as clearly as she had once felt its approval. It wanted to be given, but not like this. Not offered and rejected. Not to someone it had already judged and lost. She walked back to her car slowly. Each step made the bag heavier. Night had fully arrived, shadows pooling unnaturally along the concrete, stretching where no light should allow them. She looked back again and again. Half-hopping Alma would reappear, call out, change her mind. The shelter stayed dark. Inside the car, Alice set the bag on the passenger seat and stared at it. The paper shifted with a faint sound, as if something inside were adjusting itself. She had failed. The one time she had tried to give without cameras, without applause, without return. And she had failed because she hadn't truly let go of herself. Because even now, her charity had been a transaction, a bargain for survival. She understood, finally, what Alma had seen. Not generosity, desperation. A woman using someone else's lack as a tool to escape consequence. It was ugly, exploitative. Exactly the kind of behavior she would have condemned if it hadn't been her own. The coat began to warm again, slow and deliberate, like a living thing pleased with the lesson. Thursday came. Alice woke near noon, head heavy, dreams still clinging to her skin. Thanksgiving, the seventh day. 12 hours remained. She moved through the afternoon like glass, present but brittle. The house felt unfamiliar, as though she were already leaving it. The coat waited, patient now, certain. Midnight approached without hurry. And Alice, for the first time in her life, had nothing left to curate. Panic set in like a fever. Alice refreshed page after page, ancient myths repackaged for modern screens, anonymous essays on contracts older than language, rules that never bent. Every source agreed on the same brutal point. Exactness mattered. Not close enough, not symbolic, exact. Given to the poor. Pure charity. Real sacrifice. One word kept repeating, as if the internet itself were accusing her. Genuine. Genuine giving. Genuine compassion. Genuine recognition of another person's humanity. Alice stared at the dark screen and thought about her audience. Hundreds of thousands of people who watched her life and wanted pieces of it. She had taught them to desire. Her clothes, her furniture, her mornings, her version of happiness. She had never wanted anything from them but attention, metrics, proof she mattered. Had she ever seen them as people? Or were they numbers arranged to soothe her fear of being unseen? She tried to remember the last conversation she'd had with no purpose behind it. No angle, no outcome, no quiet calculation of benefit. Nothing came. Her phone lay silent on the counter. No calls, no messages. The world was already moving on without her. Other faces, other feeds, other perfectly curated lives. And to her surprise, she felt nothing. For the first time in years, the numbers meant nothing. The loss meant nothing. What mattered was surviving the night, which she realized bitterly was still selfish, still about her. At 10 o'clock, she sat on the bedroom floor with the coat laid out in front of her like a body. She cried until her face burned, until there was no performance left in it, no beauty, no control. She spoke into the empty room, to the coat, to whatever might be listening. I'm sorry. I don't know how to be good. I don't know how to give without trying to get something back. The coat said nothing. At 11:30, an idea surfaced. A memory she hadn't noticed before. A metal donation bin near the grocery store on Indian School Road. Clothes dropped inside, redistributed to people in need. That counted, didn't it? Charity technically. No refusal, no confrontation. No eyes seeing through her. A loophole. She grabbed the coat and drove. The parking lot was deserted when she arrived. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, moths battering themselves against the glow. The donation bin stood where she remembered it, green and white, industrial, impersonal. A chute at shoulder height. Words stenciled on the side about helping hands and making a difference. Alice lifted the coat. The velvet felt heavy, resistant. She forced it toward the opening. The bin creaked. The coat caught. For a moment it felt like tug-of-war, fabric pulling back, refusing the mouth of metal. Alice shoved harder, panic flooding her veins. The coat slid inside. The flap slammed shut with a sound like finality. She stepped back, breathing hard, waiting. Nothing happened. No heat, no whisper, no release. The clock on her dashboard ticked forward. 11:58. 11:59. Midnight came. The world did not end. Alice laughed weakly, relief crashing through her. She had beaten it, outplayed the rules, survived. Then she felt it. Not outside. Inside, a pressure behind her eyes, a sudden hollow emptiness as if something essential had been removed cleanly, efficiently. She dropped to her knees on the asphalt, gasping, hands clawing at her chest. The rules had been followed and broken. The coat had been given, but not genuinely, and the debt finally had been collected. The words "your donations change lives" were stenciled across the metal, like a promise that had been repeated too often to mean anything anymore. Alice's hands trembled as she gathered the coat. It was far heavier than fabric had any right to be, weighted with something dense and unseen. The velvet radiated warmth, no heat, as if it had been resting beneath open sky instead of in the cool silence of her car. 11:51. She stepped toward the bin. The chute gaped wide, a black mouth waiting patiently. The smell hit her first: machine oil, dust, old cloth, the combined ghosts of everything people had chosen not to keep. 11:54. She spoke aloud, voice cracking, formalizing it the way every source said mattered. "I'm giving you to the poor. This is charity. I'm donating you to people who need you." The coat offered no resistance, no reply. 11:57. She lifted it. The velvet slid through her fingers with unsettling ease, like something relieved to be released. The collar vanished into the dark, then the sleeves. The hem lingered a heartbeat longer before slipping away, leaving her hands empty and strangely cold. The bin swallowed it whole. Alice stepped back, hugging herself, shoulders aching where warmth had been moments before. She checked her phone. 11:58. 2 minutes. She walked to her car on legs that didn't feel fully attached to her body, locked the doors, started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed softly. 11:59. 1 minute. She leaned forward until her forehead touched the steering wheel. Her breath fogged the leather. She searched herself for relief and found only a hollow space where fear had been replaced by nothing at all. The clock clicked over. Midnight. For a moment the world held steady. The parking lot stayed empty. Fluorescent lights hummed. A moth struck the windshield and fluttered away. Then the cold arrived. It began low in her spine and crept upward, spreading like ink through water. The air inside the car thickened, pressing against her ears. The temperature dropped so fast she could see her breath bloom white in the dark. She tried to move. She couldn't. Her hands were locked to the wheel, her feet frozen against the pedals, awake this time fully, horribly awake. Something shifted at the edge of her vision. She couldn't turn her head, but she saw movement in fragments through the windows, something flowing, pooling, reshaping itself. It moved like oil, like smoke, like velvet given motion. It circled the car slowly, deliberately, as if considering her. It stopped at the driver's side window. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Wrong. Her face looked older, not aged, used. Her eyes were deeper, darker, as though they had stared too long into enclosed spaces. The reflection smiled. Alice felt it then, with absolute clarity. The coat had been given, but not as a gift, not with recognition, not with humility, not with love. She had tried to escape instead of seeing. The reflection leaned closer, mouth opening as if to speak. And Alice finally understood the true cost of wanting everything without ever giving herself away. The lights buzzed. The night watched. And the contract, exact and unforgiving, completed itself. Older, hollowed out. Her eyes were empty in the same way the women in her dreams had always been empty, used up, scraped clean. And behind her reflection, barely visible through the frost-silvered glass, stood more reflections. Other women, an endless line stretching backward into darkness, an infinite inheritance of owners. Every one of them wore the coat. Every one of them stared forward with the same vacant, obedient gaze. No rage, no fear, just absence. The cold deepened. Alice's teeth rattled uncontrollably as frost crept across the inside of the windshield, branching into delicate lines that almost looked like words, almost like writing, almost like the looping French script from the note. She tried to scream. Her lungs refused. She tried to pray. No words came. She tried to promise anything, change, kindness, generosity. But promises only mattered before midnight. And she had already broken the only one that counted. The thing outside the car began to pull. Not with hands, not with force, with inevitability. Alice felt herself sliding toward the window, not her body but her awareness peeling sideways like a drawer opening. This was the mechanism. This was how it harvested. No violence, no blood, just removal. The body stayed. The person didn't. Another shell, another woman in the line. Alice fought. She pushed with every instinct she had. Panic, selfishness, hunger to exist. She clawed inward, anchoring herself to sensation, to breath, to the stubborn animal will to remain. It didn't slow the pull. It was patient, absolute. Gravity dressed in red velvet. She was halfway gone now, split between places, still in the car and somewhere else. Somewhere dark and close, and crowded with whispers that brushed against her like moth wings. Then, it stopped. The pulling ceased abruptly. The pressure vanished. The presence recoiled from the window and began circling the car again, faster this time. Uneven, agitated. Alice felt its confusion like static crawling over her skin, like the air tightening before a storm breaks. It was checking, rereading, verifying the terms. The code had been surrendered, placed in a donation bin, given away within the timeline. The seventh night completed. Everything aligned, except one clause. Alice gasped as paralysis shattered all at once. Air tore into her lungs. She folded forward, hands flying to her neck, her chest, solid, present, hers. Outside, the thing moved faster, spiraling the car in tight, furious loops. And then Alice understood. The curse bound the demon as tightly as it bound its owners. The contract was precise. It could only take the soul if the coat was not given to the poor, not discarded, not abandoned, not escaped. Given. The words she had spoken aloud, formal, deliberate, had mattered. Charity, intent, witness. The thing outside let out no sound, but the air screamed with its frustration. It circled once more, violently, then recoiled, folding inward on itself like smoke sucked back into nothing. The cold broke. The frost melted. The reflections vanished. Silence fell into the parking lot like a held breath finally released. Alice sat shaking long after the lights stopped buzzing. When she finally drove away, she didn't look back at the donation bin. Somewhere, someone cold would find a velvet coat that fit perfectly. And somewhere else, an ancient thing learned, once again, that contracts, even infernal ones, do not forgive imprecision. Brief, distant, already losing relevance, because pain belonged to bodies, and she was no longer fully inside hers. The thing tightened, not choking, claiming, like fabric settling into its proper shape. Alice felt herself folding inward as the presence threaded through her ribs, slid along her spine, wrapped her heart the way velvet once had wrapped her shoulders. Warm, intimate, possessive. This was ownership made complete. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the pavement, the screen still glowing with the article headline. Fake charity bins, for-profit recyclers, language exploited, trust monetized. A loophole. Her loophole. The irony hit her with a hysterical clarity so sharp it almost made her laugh. Of course the demon cared about precision. Of course it enforced the letter, not the spirit. She had spent years surviving on technicalities, disclosures buried in captions, promises phrased just vaguely enough, generosity performed but never given. She had tried to outmaneuver something that lived in breathed contracts. The presence pulled harder. Alice felt the seam between herself and her body split cleanly, like stitching coming undone. Her vision doubled. The parking lot smeared into light and shadow, and beneath it, behind it, she saw the other place again. Dark, close, crowded. Whispers brushed against her thoughts, not voices but impressions. Regret without memory, longing without language. The women from the reflection stood there, shoulder to shoulder, all wearing the coat, all hollow, all watching her arrive. She understood then what ownership meant. Not death, continuation. Her body sagged against the car, still breathing, still warm, still marketable if someone bothered to look. The presence peeled Alice free with practiced ease, like slipping a hand from a glove. There was a moment, just one, where she hovered between states. In that thin space, she felt something else slip past her. Relief, not hers. The demon withdrew, satisfied now, folding itself back into a shape she recognized. Red velvet coalesced around her awareness, heavy and perfect and complete. The coat was whole again. Alice was inside it. From somewhere very far away, she sensed movement. A truck, metal doors slamming, the donation bin being emptied at dawn, hands sorting fabric, appraising weight and texture, someone pausing at the velvet, admiring it, someone smiling. The curse continued. In the parking lot, Alice's body remained slumped in the driver's seat, eyes open, unfocused, reflecting fluorescent light. By morning, someone would call it a medical emergency. Stress, exhaustion, influencer burnout. A tragedy without a villain. And somewhere, weeks later, a woman would pull on a beautiful red coat she bought for far less than it was worth, and feel just briefly like it had been made for her. The moment it began, she realized the pain wasn't the worst part. It was the separation. Something yanked at her from the inside, a violent sideways pull, as if the center of her being had been hooked and reeled toward the window. Her body stayed locked in place, but she didn't. Not all of her. The part that thought, feared, remembered, that part was being peeled free. She grabbed for the steering wheel, for the seat, for anything solid. Her hands passed straight through, pale and insubstantial, like breath on cold glass. With every heartbeat, she felt thinner, lighter, less real. The world warped. The parking lot tipped at a sickening angle. Overhead lights smeared into long white scars across the night. The metal clothing box at the edge of the lot swelled in her vision, either rushing toward her or dragging her inward. Distance stopped behaving properly. Then the voices started. Soft at first, then overwhelming. Women murmuring in overlapping tongues, some familiar, some ancient, some never meant for human mouths. Their words crawled into her ears, her chest, her thoughts. She didn't just hear them. She remembered them. A starving woman decades ago, clutching the coat and bargaining with a stranger, believing survival justified the lot. A young girl abandoning it on public transport, convincing herself that neglect counted as mercy. A mother long ago pressing it into her child's arms, trading her daughter's future for one more sunrise. Memory after memory slammed into her. Panic, rationalization, the same final realization blooming too late in every mind. They had all chosen themselves. And now Alice understood what she was being added to. Not a haunting, not a punishment. A collection. The women weren't screaming anymore. They were watching, waiting, making space. She felt the truth settle with brutal calm. This thing didn't just curse people, it archived them. Each failure, each selfish calculation, stitched into its history. A lineage built from small moral evasions that added up to damnation. For one crystalline second, clarity sliced through her terror. Real generosity wasn't about objects, or gestures, or outcomes. It was about why. And she had never once given without keeping score. Every donation, every cause, every public act of kindness had been staged. Currency traded for approval, safety, applause. Even at the end, even facing annihilation, she'd hunted for a technical escape instead of helping another human without conditions. You couldn't outsmart something that weighed the heart itself. Her vision narrowed. She saw her own hand drifting toward the door handle, transparent now, already fading from the physical world. She tried to scream, tried to promise, tried to change. The darkness took her mid-thought. Velvet whispered around her awareness, soft, heavy, patient. The sensation of fabric settling where shoulders should have been. Then nothing. Outside, the car sat quietly under buzzing lights, engine humming to itself. A moth traced lazy circles through the glow. No struggle, no sign of what had passed through the glass moments earlier. Nearby, inside a metal box meant for discarded clothes, something weighted, folded neatly, warm despite the cold night, ready for the next pair of hands that believed intention didn't matter. Nestled among torn jackets and faded shirts, the red velvet coat lay perfectly still. Morning would come. A truck would arrive. Hands would rummage. Someone would pause. Someone would feel the weight, the softness, the impossible warmth. Someone would think it was luck. The coat had no urgency. It never had. But Story 2. Dr. Alina Vance drove past the same twisted juniper for the third time before doubt crept in. She slowed the car, eyes flicking from the tree to the empty horizon, then back again. Same split trunk, same pale scar in the bark, same scatter of stones at its roots. The road hadn't curved. There were no forks, and yet somehow she was back where she started. The desert played tricks on people, she reminded herself. Heat, fatigue, expectation. Still, her grip tightened on the steering wheel. The rental car's air conditioning had died an hour earlier, leaving the cabin thick and breathless. Sweat clung to her back beneath her blouse, the sensation uncomfortably close to a hand resting where it didn't belong. She told herself it was stress. 48 hours ago, she'd been in Boston, surrounded by brick buildings, schedules, and certainty. Now the land felt watchful. Alina specialized in collective belief, how fear spread, how stories synchronized across communities, until imagination hardened into shared reality. She had built a career dismantling the supernatural with data, interviews, charts. 6 months on a reservation clinic studying what the grant proposal called localized mass perception anomalies was supposed to be straightforward. It never was when the desert was involved. The clinic emerged from the heat like an illusion resolving itself into fact. A squat concrete structure crouched on red earth, utilitarian and tired. A man waited on the steps, younger than she'd expected. Early 40s maybe, gray threaded through dark hair pulled back tight, the kind of eyes that had seen too many nights run long. "You made good time," he said. No handshake. Alina noted it, filed it away, let it go. Outsiders didn't get gestures, they got tolerance. 17 cases in 6 weeks. She knew the number by heart. She calculated the exact point where internal handling failed, but outside authority stayed uninterested. Adults waking with unexplained injuries. Children terrified of sleeping. One household vacated overnight after generations because something moved inside the walls. The reports were filled with words she'd spent her career deconstructing. Skinwalker, witch, shadow. Belief language. Yet standing there, she felt something she hadn't anticipated. Not curiosity. Apprehension. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and dust. Files waited on a metal desk, thick with handwritten notes and inconsistent symptoms. Alina flipped through them methodically, anchoring herself to patterns. Abrasions without trauma. Night terrors shared across families who didn't speak anymore. Marks shaped like fingers, like fabric pressed too tightly against skin. "This isn't hysteria," she said finally. Dr. Sass didn't look surprised. "Good," he replied, "because hysteria doesn't leave fingerprints." That night, Alina lay awake in the staff quarters listening to the desert breathe. Wind moved through scrub. Something brushed the outer wall, soft and deliberate. She told herself it was branches. She told herself many things. Just before sleep took her, she noticed something hanging on the back of the door. A coat she didn't remember unpacking, deep red. Plush, elegant in a way that didn't belong to this place. It fit perfectly when she tried it on. That was the first mistake. The desert, patient as ever, did not rush the lesson. The clinic smelled sharp and sterile, but beneath the antiseptic lingered something untamed, something animal and unwashed, a scent that refused to be scrubbed away. Alina let it follow her past the empty exam rooms to the converted supply closet that would serve as her office for the next 6 months. The single window framed nothing but scrub brush stretching into the horizon, endless red and gold dust. 17 folders lay stacked neatly on the desk, each one a case she'd soon untangle, or so she hoped. Dr. Sass's explanation was short, clipped, measured. The families are waiting. Some didn't want to come. Talking about it gives it power. The first family was in room 3. The grandmother had seen it 3 times, once outside her Hogan, once trailing her truck along the highway, once staring in through her bedroom window. After the 3rd sighting, she couldn't speak for 5 days. Alina collected the intake forms and started her recorder. Familiar territory, trauma transforming into narrative, the mind weaving explanations for neurological phenomena it couldn't otherwise interpret. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, the way darkness tricks the brain into creating patterns. She had seen these symptoms before, but never with such consistency, never across so many witnesses. That was the anomaly, the vector she had come to trace. How could fear transmit itself so precisely from one mind to another? The grandmother, Alice Benali, sat in the plastic exam chair, small and still, her face a map of sun-baked lines and years etched hard. Her daughter held one hand lightly on her shoulder, an ambiguous gesture hovering between comfort and gentle restraint. Alina eased into her own chair, clicked the recorder on, and let the silence stretch before speaking. Mrs. Benali, thank you for coming today. I know this has been difficult. I want to understand what you experienced and help you reclaim your peace of mind. Alice's eyes fixed slightly past Alina's left shoulder, unblinking. When she spoke, her voice was coarse, worn smooth by years of hard life. It stood on my roof. I heard the claws on the metal 4 legs, then 2, then breathing at my window. Alina scribbled quickly in her notebook. Auditory hallucinations, classic. Transitional state between sleep and wake. The brain filling in narrative details to explain ambiguous sensory input. And the time, she asked. Maybe 3 in the morning, Alice said, voice low, distant. Alina noted it, patterns forming, repetition across witnesses, precision that suggested something beyond simple delusion. Her pulse quickened ever so slightly, curiosity mingled with unease. There was logic here, rules, and for reasons she couldn't yet articulate, the rules felt alive. The grandmother said it was just before dawn. The moon had been full, white and heavy in the sky. She had been in bed when she heard it. Alina leaned forward slightly. And you were asleep when the sound started. Alice hesitated just a fraction of a second. I think so. I woke up because of them. There it was, the opening. Alina moved carefully, the way she always did. She spoke about the narrow borderland between sleeping and waking, that fragile corridor where dreams bleed into reality. She explained how the brain, starved of context in the dark, invents structure. How sound becomes intention, how shadow becomes form. She never said the word imaginary. She framed it as misfiring signals, as a protective system working too hard. She watched Alice's face as she spoke, looking for resistance, for fear hardening into defiance. Instead, she saw uncertainty begin to ripple, doubt gentle and tentative. The daughter's hand tightened on her mother's shoulder. She saw it 2 more times, she said, in daylight. Alina nodded calmly. We'll get there, but first this moment matters most. If we understand how your mind handled this experience, the others will make sense too. Alice's certainty wavered. She repeated more slowly now, I know what I saw. Alina guided her through grounding exercises. Name what you can hear. The hum of the vent, the distant voices in the hallway, what you can feel. The chair beneath you, your feet on the floor. Pull the mind out of the past and anchor it to the present. By the end of the session, Alice looked exhausted, but steadier, less like someone bracing for an attack. Alina wrote detailed notes afterward. Subject responsive to reframing. Cultural narrative shows flexibility under sustained rational intervention. Continued sessions recommended. 3 more appointments were scheduled. By the second session, Alice brought new details, ones she hadn't mentioned before. She described the thing's movement, how it didn't just appear, it circled her home. 3 slow passes in one direction, then one against it, clockwise, counterclockwise, intentional, measured. She spoke of marks she'd found the next morning, scratches carved into the doorframe, too high for an animal, too deliberate, too precise. Alina listened without interruption. She recognized the pattern immediately, memory reconstruction, each retelling adding structure, clarity, detail, fear sharpening into mythology. But later that night, alone in her temporary housing, Alina found herself thinking about the numbers. 3 and 1, reversal, ritual symmetry. She dismissed it and went asleep. On the third night, she dreamed of footsteps on metal, of weight shifting above her ceiling, of breathing where no breath should be. She woke at 3:12 a.m., heart racing, skin slick with sweat. The next morning, 2 new folders appeared on her desk. By the end of the week, there were 5. Different family, different ages, same description, same timing, same movements. Alina told herself this was exactly how mass hysteria worked. Fear spreading through narrative, the mind borrowing imagery from its neighbors, culture as contagion. But something about the consistency unsettled her. By the 4th session, Alice stopped sitting in the chair. She stood instead back to the wall, eyes tracking the corners of the room. "It doesn't like being talked about," she said quietly. Alina paused. "What does?" "The thing," Alice replied. "It listens." Alina smiled gently, though a chill crept along her arms. "Talking doesn't give it power," she said. "Belief does." Alice met her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were clear, too clear. "Then why did it start coming after you?" The room seemed to contract. "That's not possible," Alina said automatically. Alice tilted her head. "You wake up at the same time now. You hear it too." Alina didn't answer. That night, the air conditioning in her rental failed again. The heat pressed against her skin like a presence. As she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, she heard it. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of something packing. 4 steps. Then 2. The next morning, Alina found marks on the doorframe outside her room. Thin lines in the wood, too high up to make sense. She stared at them for a long time before touching her recorder. For the first time in her career, she didn't turn it on. Somewhere in the desert, something had learned her name. And it was very patient. Woke each night with her own mind fraying at the edges. After sessions, she would lie in the darkened rental, tracing invisible patterns on the ceiling with her eyes, replaying the cases she'd seen that day. She could still hear the faint scrape of claws on wood, the subtle rustle of footsteps across rooftops, the low, irregular breathing that had frightened her patients into thinking their homes were invaded by something inhuman. She began to notice how memory could thicken, fold in on itself like wet clay. A detail mentioned once became a motif repeated 3 times. A shape glimpsed in the corner of the eye became a fully realized creature in the retelling. The stories gained weight, texture stitched in by fear and imagination, and the people she treated became actors in a shared hallucination that felt to them utterly real. Alina knew the mechanisms: perspective, expectation, anxiety, but the visceral reality remained undeniable. A teenage boy had insisted that the paw prints surrounding his family's sheep pen were shifting shapes, growing and shrinking overnight. Alina took casts, showed him photographs, explained how soil compression, erosion, and moonlight could create illusions of movement. He traced the patterns with his fingers, uncertainty gnawing at him like the wind through a hollow tree. The middle-aged man who swore something ran beside his truck at highway speed. Alina demonstrated tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer in animal eyes, showed him photographs of coyotes in headlights, spoke gently about how speed and darkness warp perception. His hands shook as he nodded, relief and embarrassment mingling. Each session was a careful embroidery of memory, a weaving together of truth and illusion. Alina never ridiculed, never dismissed. She positioned herself as a collaborator in perception, a guide helping the mind recognize its own errors without shamming it. You weren't crazy, she would say. You were human. Your brain did what it was designed to do under stress. But behind the careful explanations, Alina's own nights were restless. The patterns followed her home, scratches she hadn't seen during the day, shadows flickering in corners of her eyes, the soft scrape of something moving where nothing should. The logic she presented to her patients did not shield her from the persistence of fear, from the creeping realization that the stories she unraveled during daylight somehow returned to her at night, growing thicker, more insistent, almost as if they knew her. In the quiet hours, she sometimes questioned the neat rationality she offered. Perhaps she was untangling fear from others, but weaving it into herself. Perhaps the very act of guiding them out of terror left a trace in her mind, something that memory, imagination, and instinct could not easily erase. And sometimes, just before sleep, she would hear it, the subtle, deliberate movement of claws over wood, a sound no rational explanation could entirely account for, echoing softly through the high desert night. By the third week, the memories stopped feeling borrowed. They felt lived. When the teenage boy described the thing packing his family's livestock pen, Alina nodded at all the right moments because she remembered it too. She remembered the fence biting into her palms as she crouched low, the smell of damp earth, the slick warmth beneath her hands. She remembered watching the boy from the dark, tasting his fear the way an animal tastes air before rain. She had almost stepped forward then, almost let him see her fully. Hunger had urged her closer. Instinct had pulled her back. When the man talked about something running beside his truck, she didn't need to imagine it. She remembered the burn in her lungs as she matched his speed, the joy of keeping pace with steel and light. She remembered angling her face just right so the headlights would catch her eyes and throw that unmistakable shine back at him. She remembered laughing as he screamed and hit the gas. Every session erased her. That was the strange part. With every calm explanation, every scientific reframing, she wasn't just dismantling fear, she was scrubbing herself out of their lives. She replaced certainty with doubt, memory with maybes. If they ever told the story again, it would sound smaller, softer, wrapped in hesitation. I thought I saw something. Looking back, I'm not sure. She was teaching them to forget her. The clinic director watched closely, too closely. He sat in on sessions, silent and still, eyes tracking her the way prey watches a predator it doesn't yet recognize. He rarely interrupted, but his presence pressed against her skin. One afternoon, after a young mother left, hands no longer shaking, children finally allowed outside, he followed Alina down the hallway. "You're very effective," he said. She didn't look up from her notes. Fear feeds on uncertainty. Once you name the mechanism, it loses its teeth. "Or its shape," he replied. She paused just for a breath. "I think these people deserve rest," she said carefully. "They deserve to feel safe where they live." He studied her face. One of the men mentioned the thing stood upright. You explained that before he ever said it. Her pulse ticked faster, barely noticeable, but real. "People remember details once they start talking," she said smoothly. "The mind fills gaps." "But you addressed it preemptively," he said. "You wrote about it in your notes before the session." Silence stretched between them. She met his gaze without blinking. "Then I reviewed his case thoroughly." He held her eyes longer than polite, longer than professional. Then he nodded. But the question he didn't ask hung heavy in the air, unfinished. That night she saw him again in the parking lot, sitting in his truck, engine dark, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead as if afraid to turn his head. She watched from the edge of the light. She understood now what she had been doing. She wasn't curing hysteria. She was tending a boundary, making sure the stories stayed small, making sure witnesses learned how to doubt themselves. making sure no one ever spoke with the kind of certainty that attracts attention. Because belief gives shape, and shape invites hunger. The desert had always had rules. You could live alongside it, study it, explain it away, but only if you didn't name it too clearly. Only if you taught yourself to look away at the right moment. Alina returned to her rental late. She locked the door. She washed her hands longer than necessary, watching the water spiral red-brown into the drain, though there was nothing visible on her skin. When she lay down, the ceiling fan cast rotating shadows that looked briefly like antlers, like claws, like something stretching. She smiled. Tomorrow there would be another session, another frightened witness, another memory gently sanded down until it no longer cut. She would listen, she would explain, she would help them forget. And when the desert needed her again, when someone stayed awake too late, stared too long into the dark, believed too hard, she would remember everything. She never asked him what he suspected. She didn't need to. The perceptive ones always sensed when a line had been reached. They felt the tremor beneath their thoughts and chose silence over certainty. Numbing some truths didn't bring clarity. It shattered the fragile architecture that kept communities functional. Letting people heal inside a comfortable explanation was kinder than tearing open a reality they couldn't survive intact. He started his engine and left without a glance back at the clinic. That, more than anything, confirmed her understanding. The reports kept coming, always dusk or deeper night. Always sounds without sources, movements without edges, silhouettes dissolving when stared at directly. Alina cataloged every account with meticulous care, tracing how fear leapt from family to family, how language itself acted as a carrier. She was convinced the work would matter. She could already see the paper's title forming, the careful phrasing, the academic applause. This would be cited, remembered. Sleep became optional. The desert at night was too quiet, stripped of the comforting noise that cushioned cities. No engines, no sirens, only wind sliding across sand and calls from creatures she chose not to identify. The walls of her small room were thin enough that footsteps in the hallway woke her more than once, slow, deliberate steps that vanished when she opened the door. She blamed schedules, fatigue, the building settling as temperatures plunged after sunset. She stayed awake later each night, chasing clarity through notes until exhaustion claimed her. And sometimes, before surrendering to sleep, she stood at the window and stared out at the land washed pale by moonlight. In those moments, something inside her leaned forward, aching. A second gravity tugged at her bones. Hunger never disappeared. It waited. It lived beneath her professional calm, beneath language and logic, a constant awareness as steady as a pulse. Even when she fed it, it remained patient, coiled, enduring. On nights when it grew loud, she pressed her hand to the cold glass and remembered speed. Wait, the joy of muscle and breath and pursuit. The human world felt thin then, paper thin. All its explanations and rituals, its politeness and peer review, felt like a costume she wore too tightly. But it was a necessary disguise. The best camouflage was the one you could almost convince yourself was real. Her data revealed patterns that thrilled her. The imagery repeated with uncanny precision, as if stories weren't just shared but transferred intact, passed like a living thing from mouth to mouth, mind to mind. Fear didn't just spread, it synchronized. And Alina smiled as she wrote, because she wasn't just studying the phenomenon, she was maintaining it. The moment Alina stepped into the clinic that morning, something in the air felt different, thicker, charged, like static before a storm. She didn't notice it at first. Her mind was already rehearsing the method that had become second nature. Meet the patient, listen without judgment, locate the crack where certainty falters, and slip in an alternative explanation so elegant it felt inevitable. Reality, she knew, was malleable when presented carefully. By now, the town had begun to teach itself fear. One person's whispered sighting became another's certainty, each family, each child, unconsciously reinforcing the next. The hallucinations were no longer random. They had grown into a shared vision, synchronized across households, cemented by cultural weight and stories told in hushed tones around kitchen tables. Alina called it a case study in collective delusion, but she recognized the artistry in the chaos. It was a dance, human minds shaping the landscape of belief until the improbable became undeniable. Her strategy was deceptively simple. First, earn trust. Let them feel she belonged to the room, not above it. Second, find the gap between perception and interpretation, that delicate stretch where reality frayed. Third, introduce a rational thread that fit the evidence just as convincingly as the terrifying alternative. Fourth, reinforce it with repetition, guiding exercises, and attention to sensory grounding. Fifth, ensure they believed they'd unearthed the truth themselves, never that she had placed it there. The brilliance was in invisibility. The power came from letting people think they had stumbled upon reason on their own. By the sixth week, the results were undeniable. 2 of her earliest patients had slept without terror for the first time in months. The family who had abandoned their home returned, hesitant at first, then steadily reclaiming their space. The teenager who had pinned photographs of tracks on his bedroom wall quietly removed them, as if erasing the last tether to his fear. Alina felt a thrill unlike any she'd known. This wasn't satisfaction in destruction, as she had experienced in darker impulses long ago. This was artistry, the reshaping of perception, the delicate hand guiding reality itself. To remake a world without harming a single person physically, this was mastery. She watched them in sessions, keeping her professional mask firmly in place, even as admiration for the mechanics of her work hummed beneath her calm. The human mind, she noted, was eager to accept a coherent story over a messy truth. Relief was currency, and she traded it carefully. Even the teenager who had once witnessed her ripping through his family's livestock now nodded at her explanations, agreeing that the chaos he had seen must have been a misperception, a trick of light, or an overactive imagination. His memories folded, bent, and reassembled in real time, creating a tidy narrative that fit the story she offered. Then came Tuesday, late October, when the final patient arrived, Raymond B. Alina didn't yet know that he would challenge her craft in ways no prior case had. His presence carried weight, a quiet intensity that made the air pulse around her. As he sat down, she noted how he watched her, measuring, anticipating, testing. This wasn't just another mind to guide. This was a mind that might see too clearly, a variable in her otherwise elegant design, and she welcomed the test. Because in that quiet, sunlit room, amid files and photographs and whispered fears, Alina realized something profound. Power wasn't in what you could destroy. Power was in what you could shape, what you could quietly rearrange until the world believed exactly what you wanted it to. And for the first time, she felt the intoxicating weight of absolute, invisible control. He came in like a man already halfway erased. 43 years old, a ranch worker who knew every fence post and washout along the southern edge of the land. Or at least, he used to. Now he hadn't shown up for weeks. His sister had dragged him here after he stopped leaving his trailer, except to sit outside at dusk with a rifle resting across his knees, eyes locked on the distant line of trees as if waiting for something to step out. Sleep had abandoned him, It showed in the bruised shadows under his eyes, in the way his shoulders hunched as though bracing for impact. His hands shook so badly the chair rattled when he gripped the armrests. This wasn't simple fatigue. This was what prolonged fear did when it hollowed a person out. Alina didn't rush him. Silence was a tool, and she let it do its work. After a long stretch, his voice cracked open. He'd been checking the southern fence line. Late afternoon, the pasture that pressed up against the hills. That's when he found the calf, dead, throat ripped open, no feeding marks, just violence abandoned. At first, he told himself it was a big cat. That made sense. That story fit until he saw the ground. The tracks were wrong. Too large, too wide. The spacing didn't match anything he knew. He remembered standing there, staring too long, forcing his brain to choose the least frightening explanation and move on. So he kept working, kept tightening wire, kept pretending nothing was off. That's when he noticed it watching him. At a distance, it could have passed for something familiar. The size lined up. The outline almost worked, but the way it looked at him didn't. Predators usually slipped away when noticed. This one didn't flinch. It just stood there, maybe 50 yards out, eyes fixed, unblinking. He glanced down for his tools. Barely a moment. When he looked up again, it was closer, much closer. No sound, no movement he could recall, just distance erased. Alina noted the pause, the missing seconds. Time gaps were fertile ground. Then his voice dropped. It rose up. Not climbed, rose. Balanced on two legs the way a person would, but nothing else about it fit. The proportions were off. Limbs too long. Head set wrong. And its eyes caught the sunlight and flared unnaturally bright, like beams reflected straight back at him. Alina's pen hovered. She wrote anyway. Fear amplifies light. Stress distorts scale. He didn't stay to analyze. He ran, drove straight home, locked himself inside, told himself walls were protection. That night, something circled the trailer. He heard it packing, 4 steps, then 2, then 4 again, scraping against the siding, testing. When he finally looked through the window, the same eyes stared back at him from the dark. Alina let him finish. She didn't interrupt the spiral. She recognized it instantly. One unclear event igniting dread sharpening awareness, awareness destroying sleep, exhaustion inviting waking dreams, each night feeding the next until fear felt like proof. When he stopped talking, she began. Slowly, gently, step by step. She guided him back to the first moment. The dead calf, explained how stress chemistry narrows perception, how adrenaline fills in gaps with threats, how animals move faster and quieter than we remember, especially when we aren't watching. She spoke about reflective tissue in animal eyes, about how light can turn ordinary into monstrous when the brain is already on edge. She never said he was wrong. She said he was human. By the end of the session, his breathing had eased. His hands had steadied. He nodded as if something heavy had been set down. The terror hadn't vanished, but it had shifted from an external hunter to an internal storm, and that made it manageable. He left believing he'd uncovered the truth himself. Alina watched him go, satisfied by the familiar relief of success. Another life redirected. Another reality gently replaced. She didn't mention the part that didn't fit her model. The calf hadn't been eaten, and nothing she knew ever walked away from a kill like that. Every time the story circled back, she loosened its grip. She talked him through mirrors and windows, how glass could throw light back at you and trick the eye into seeing a watcher where none existed. She described how a frightened brain, once primed for danger, began to hunt for it everywhere, turning harmless reflections into threats, ordinary sounds into pursuit. By the end of the hour, Raymond's fingers had stopped twitching. The tight, hunted panic behind his eyes softened into something closer to shame, then relief. "Come back in a few days," she told him gently. "We'll walk through it again. The more you understand it, the quieter it gets." He nodded and left with a steadier step, no longer resembling a man counting down his final days. That night, Alina stayed behind. Darkness settled early, swallowing the land beyond the clinic until even the horizon disappeared. She heard the front door secure itself, the familiar sounds of Sosie's departure drifting away into the distance. The building emptied as it often did now. She didn't mind. Solitude sharpened her focus. Silence made patterns easier to see. She was buried in her notes when something crossed the roof. A sequence of footfalls, heavy, then lighter, then heavy again. Her gaze lifted to the ceiling without urgency. Coyotes roamed close when resources ran thin. They climbed, prowled, explored. She'd watched them circle the dumpsters more than once. The roof made sense. Elevated ground always did. Except this wasn't a coyote. She knew exactly what was moving above her because she had arranged it herself 3 nights earlier. Not fully, never fully, just enough. A scuffed patch of metal, a few strands of coarse hair snagged where panels met, evidence that hinted, not declared. Leaving a trace without a conclusion, that was the craft. The steps continued, perfectly spaced. 4, pause, 2, pause, 4 again. The cadence of something undecided, or something that didn't need to choose. The sound scraped at instinct, setting off alarms deeper than reason. Anyone who heard it would feel the wrongness before they could name it, their bodies reacting faster than their thoughts. She had captured that sound weeks ago, played it softly outside bedroom windows, let it seep into dreams. Then she'd sat across from frightened people and helped them dismantle it piece by piece, explaining resonance, airflow, the way buildings translated movement into illusion. Now she let it echo through her own space. If someone else happened to be nearby, a nurse on rounds, a late worker, someone returning for forgotten keys, they would hear it too. They would carry it with them. And when the time came, her explanations would land heavier, feel truer. She wasn't fabricating fear. She was curating it. Alina returned to her notes as the steps faded away, calm and precise. She had experienced everything her patients described. That mattered. It made her guidance cleaner, more convincing. After all, nothing eased terror quite like hearing it explained by someone who had survived it themselves. She could explain, with confidence, how the ordinary twisted itself under pressure. Then the noise halted, directly above her office. In the sudden quiet, Alina became acutely aware of herself. The measured rise and fall of her breath, the faint electrical whine of the lights humming just beneath perception, the subtle shifts of air through the vents enough to make her ears adjust. The truth settled in. She was completely alone. A small smile touched her lips. The entire stretch of months had been a performance. Every frightened knock on her door, every trembling confession, it was all part of a carefully written play. She had worn 2 roles flawlessly, the threat lurking at the edges and the calm authority who dismantled it. She planted the fear, nurtured it, then guided people out of it with steady hands and reasonable words. They would walk away believing they had been rescued. The community would praise her for restoring calm. She would collect her data, publish her findings, and move on, leaving behind gratitude, citations, and no trace of the truth. Right on cue, scratching sounded at the window. She didn't flinch. The device outside was timed perfectly. Elena rose and stepped closer, cupping her hands around the glass to block the room's glow. The dark reflected her face back at her, layered over the desert beyond. She studied herself carefully. Did she look different when no one was watching? When she didn't have to soften her gaze or temper her presence? There was something there, perhaps, a stillness too deliberate, an attention too sharp, a patience that didn't belong to prey. But it didn't matter. No one else would ever see her like this. She returned to her desk. The scratching faded. The building sighed and settled, wood and metal adjusting to the night. By midnight, her work was complete. 17 cases, all progressing exactly as predicted. Fear reduced to data. Chaos shaped into charts. The outbreak was ending on schedule. She locked her office and walked the corridor toward her room. Emergency lights painted the walls in dull green. Her footsteps echoed strangely, stretching farther than they should have. Institutional spaces always distorted sound. She noted it absently. Inside her room, she undressed and collapsed onto the bed, too tired to care about ritual. Sleep took her quickly, empty at first, then splintering. She dreamed of movement, of running through blackened spaces, of something keeping pace behind her, of the certainty that stopping meant dying. The alarm pulled her back. She rose feeling unrested, hollowed out. Friday arrived, and with it Raymond B. He spoke of better sleep, of stepping outside again, of the rifle staying inside the trailer. His voice was steadier now. His fear had softened into something manageable, almost distant. Elena nodded, took notes, and smiled the way healers do. The cure was holding. By midweek, he was stepping outside again. Only in sunlight, only for a few minutes, but it was progress. What had once been raw panic had softened into tension, tension into caution, caution into something he could carry without breaking. Elena strengthened the structure she'd built in his mind, showing him how fear looped back on itself, how to interrupt it before it gained momentum. She gave him language, strategies, a sense of authorship over his own thoughts. When he rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. "About the eyes," he said quietly. "The way they looked back at me in the glass. You really think that's all it was?" She held his gaze, calm and unblinking. "I'm certain that's what you experienced." He nodded, not fully convinced, but close enough. He walked out steadier than he'd entered. That was the final case. Elena reviewed the completed records with meticulous care. Every account cataloged, every outcome tracked. The pattern was undeniable. Homes once abandoned were lived in again. Laughter returned to yards that had gone silent. Children played past dusk without glancing over their shoulders. The weight that had pressed on the community for months had lifted, dissolving like mist under a rising sun. As she boxed up her office, Dr. Sass appeared in the corridor. "You did what we needed," he said. "Where will you go now?" "Back east," she replied. "I teach, I write." He considered her for a moment. "Our elders say there are truths that don't need belief to exist." Elena smiled politely. "And my work shows belief is the only thing that ever mattered." He left her to finish. She worked until evening, sealing boxes, copying files, closing the final chapter of the residency. The clinic would continue on without her. Her role was complete. Satisfaction settled in, a clean, precise feeling. Disorder reduced to understanding. Fear reshaped into something manageable. Outside, the sky performed its slow transformation. Heat faded into deep color, then darkness. Stars emerged in impossible numbers, crowding the night, sharp and watchful. She paused to look at them longer than she intended. 6 months now lived inside cardboard and encrypted drives. She had arrived curious. She was leaving certain. The legend had been dismantled. 17 people no longer believed. She shut off the lights and locked the door. The hallway felt longer than before. Her footsteps rang with unfamiliar clarity. Emergency signs glowed red, guiding her forward. In her room, she faced the mirror and began to undress. The reflection followed every movement faithfully. She loosened buttons, slipped fabric from her shoulders, unzipped, folded. The body staring back at her was unchanged, lean, controlled, shaped by habit and restraint. Nothing monstrous, nothing impossible. Just a woman alone at the end of her work, looking into her own eyes and knowing exactly what she was capable of. She secured the door, tested the lock twice, then drew the curtains until the room became a sealed pocket of dark. Only then did she let go. Change always began in her hands. Skin stretched as tendons slid into new alignments, fingers lengthening, nails thickening into something harder, curved, purposeful. She opened and closed them slowly, watching extra joints bloom where none should be, as natural as a yawn, as ordinary as breath. Her back followed. She leaned forward and felt her spine reconfigure, bones dividing, spacing out, building a frame meant to carry weight close to the ground. Her jaw pressed outward, teeth narrowing into points. The mask of her face loosened and tightened again as structure replaced structure. When she lifted her head, the mirror no longer held a woman. Amber light flared back from unfamiliar eyes, sharp and awake. She had been meticulous, half a year of precision. None of it was meant to comfort, it was meant to unwrite. Every conversation had been a careful lie, each reassurance a blade drawn softly across memory. She hadn't cured fear, she taught doubt to eat it alive. The rancher by the fence line, recognition flickering before terror took hold. The old woman at the window, summoned again and again by a sense she couldn't resist. The boy forced to watch what happened to his animals before darkness swallowed her whole. 17 moments spaced perfectly, enough to spread dread, not enough to trigger sirens. She had studied systems the way others studied anatomy. How many reports before attention arrived? Which authorities stepped in first? What kind of expert was sent when panic looked like belief instead of crime? She shaped her history to fit the gap, polished credentials, leaned into specialties that made her inevitable. When the offer came, it felt less like luck and more like gravity doing its work. They had all seen her, and every one of them had sat across from her desk and learned to distrust their own eyes. That was the greater trick. Flesh could change, but minds could be rewritten. She had taken certainty, the sharpest thing a witness owns, and dulled it until it bent. Now if they ever spoke of her, their words would wobble. Maybe, I thought. I'm not sure anymore. The old story had existed long before she arrived with calm hands and careful questions. She hadn't created the legend. She had simply worn it, and then taught everyone else to forget the shape it took. She wore disbelief the way others wore uniforms. Calm voice, measured phrases, distance sharpened into professionalism. The old story stayed alive, but only as a story, and that made it perfect camouflage. Let them fear myths while she erased faith in the living thing that stalked their fences, circled their houses, learned the taste of their panic. She had learned to change long before titles and credentials. Those early years were sealed away, locked behind instinct and survival. What remained was appetite, the pull toward pursuit, the sacred stillness just before the end, when prey understood it had been chosen. Hunger, untreated, burns itself out. The clever learned restraint. The exceptional learned to turn restraint into service. Dr. Alina Vance, Skeptic, reassurer, the woman who returned sleep to frighten families. No one hunts the healer. No one suspects the hand that steadies them. She lowered herself fully, the shift finishing through her legs as bone and muscle reorganized into something built for speed. Feet reshaped, weight redistributed. The discarded clothes on the floor looked ridiculous now, fabric pretending to matter. In this body, the world opened wide. Sounds layered themselves into meaning. Sense carried. Story, she could count heartbeats through walls. Could trace anxiety by smell long before a scream ever formed. She had starved herself with care. 6 months of discipline. Small, quiet kills. Enough to keep the balance. Enough to wait. Now there was no reason to hold back. The witnesses had been softened. Certainty had been hollowed out and replaced with doubt so deep it would police itself. Even if someone saw her tonight, their mind would betray them. They would argue themselves into safety before dawn. She eased the window open and slipped into the night. Air rushed over her senses, thick with the layered chemistry of desert life, dust, blood, breath, growth, decay. Every living thing announced itself. The roof welcomed her paws, cool and solid. She crossed it in a rhythm that never settled, a gait that felt right because it was wrong. From above, the land unfolded endlessly. Darkness translated into silver gradients. Movement glowed. Below, headlights returned to the lot. The director's truck rolled in, hesitant, as if the night itself had called him back. Lights bloomed inside the building. She watched. Waiting had always been her strength. Hunger rolled through her now, deep and steady, sharpened by months of restraint. She would travel far before morning, find something large, something that would be explained away easily. She would run until the desert blurred beneath her, until muscle and instinct aligned into pure motion. She remained still on the roof, unseen, unchallenged, certain. After all, she was the thing no one believed in anymore. Everything unfolded the way she had mapped it in her head long before she ever arrived. The careful woman with the calm voice would fade, and what remained would breathe again. The light in Sas's office clicked off. An engine turned. Red dots shrank into darkness and vanished as they always did. Humans left. The night stayed. She dropped from the roof without sound, her movement refusing to choose a single shape. Limbs reconfigured mid-motion, 4 to 2, 2 to 4, an impossible choreography that unsettled the mind even in memory. It was the kind of sight that didn't just frighten, it corrupted the viewer's sense of order. People didn't forget it. They learned to distrust themselves instead. She crossed the lot and entered the open land beyond, where pavement surrendered to dust and distance. Behind her, the clinic slept, its emergency lights glowing faintly like watchful eyes. Inside those walls sat records, signatures, tidy conclusions. 17 testimonies reduced to doubt. 17 truths softened into theories. The moon climbed, swollen and bright, pouring silver over the desert. She ran. The ground barely acknowledged her weight. Air tore past her lungs without effort, speed unfolding as instinct rather than strain. This was the shape that fit. This was the rhythm that had always waited underneath skin and language. Everything else, the credentials, the lectures, the polite applause, had been a costume, a brilliant one, a flawless mask. She didn't slow until the buildings were gone, until the land stretched empty in every direction, and the hunger rose clean and sharp, untouched by explanation. Hunger older than stories, older than belief. Morning would come. She would return to roads and engines, to classrooms and microphones. She would be praised for clarity, for reason, for dismantling fear with intelligence and care. Papers would be published. panels would nod. The logic would close on itself so neatly no one would dare pry it open. Because who questions the woman who teaches you monsters aren't real? She paused on a rise and looked back. Pinpricks of light marked homes, lives, sleep, places she had calmed, minds she had rearranged. She lifted her head and released a sound that lived between meanings, neither howl nor word, but something that carried both. It rolled across the land, bending as her throat reshaped around it, echoing with the ghost of a term she had spoken so often it had become sacred. Misjudgment. The final sound broke apart into raw satisfaction. Small creatures scattered. The night listened. Then she turned away, moving south, swallowed by distance, leaving behind a landscape that would wake believing it had been saved. She vanished into the vast seam where sky and ground blurred together, leaving behind only impressions that refused to stay honest. Anyone who stumbled upon them later would pause, uneasy, trying to decide what they were seeing. Paw marks that elongated into something almost human. A trail that ended too cleanly, as if the creature responsible had simply unmade itself. By morning, even that uncertainty would be gone, erased by wind and drifting grit. The desert kept no testimony. It absolved everything. She ran until speed itself became cleansing. Mile after mile, she let motion consume the urge to feed, burning desire into endurance. Months of restraint had trained her well. She had learned that control sharpened pleasure, that patience deepened power. Taking life was simple. Anyone with hunger could do that. The true satisfaction came from construction, designing belief, arranging doubt, watching certainty collapse while people expressed gratitude for the collapse. 17 minds had been adjusted. 17 moments of undeniable truth carefully softened into questions. Dr. Alina Vance had not healed them. She had taught them to mistrust clarity. Tomorrow she would return to highways and airports, to lecture halls and polite conversations. She would stand before students and speak of skepticism as virtue, of evidence as the final authority. She would be celebrated for calm intelligence in a world desperate for it. And when enough time passed, when restraint became ache, she would choose another place, another story, another carefully cultivated fear. She would create the disturbance and then arrive with answers, leaving behind people who had learned the most important lesson of all, that their own eyes could not be trusted. That was the true terror. Not that something hunted in the dark, but that it wore reason so convincingly when it stepped into the light and explained that nothing had ever been there at all.